I'm Wilson Lai.
I'm Benjamin Yap.
I'm Eli Sands.
And I'm Thanmye Lagudu.
You're listening to Deep Cut. Long live Baahubali!
Baahubali! We had to do it.
Yeah, it had to happen.
Oh, is it me?
Yes.
On Deep Cut, we compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us.
We also discuss the director's life and career to bring in context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to.
Today, we are incredibly lucky and honored to have our dear friend of the podcast, Thanmye Lagudu, back to discuss a new director and a new set of films. Welcome back, Thanmye.
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Thanks, guys. Happy to be back. I'm happy that I was not insufferable last time. And
Oh my God.
Far from
that
it.
you guys decided to bring me back.
Enlightening.
Yes.
Thank you.
If you haven't heard our episodes with Thanmye that we recorded last year for the director Mani Ratnam, please do check them out because they are great episodes. They are bangers. I did listen to a bit of them earlier this week and reminisce about the good old times.
I did too because I was trying to pregame a little bit. I'm like, okay, what are all the mistakes that I've made? How can I improve them?
Oh my God, no.
So there was a little bit of that. But yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you guys about our filmmaker today, and hopefully it's a very fruitful discussion.
Oh,
Our conversation on Dil Se was one of those perspective shifting moments in movie going for me, without a doubt.
and we always keep on referencing Dil
We
Se.
really do.
It's true, yeah.
In our continuing episodes, we're like, oh, this is sort of a Dil Se moment or a Dil Se situation.
Yeah, I was listening to your guys' Happy Together episode, and I was like, and you guys made the Dil Se reference, and I was like, oh, I know why that's my favorite Wong Kar-wai now. So that was illuminating for me.
And hopefully with the filmmaker that we're going to discuss these next few weeks, we'll be able to make as many connections as we did with Ratnam's films.
Mm-hmm.
So today is a major day because we are going to be covering S.S. Rajamouli, the big boy.
Big.
And I'm so glad that we have Thanmye on this podcast, who has been Rajamouli pilled and has Rajamouli pilled us as well. In a good way, in the best way.
I'm glad to hear this because, Wilson, tell me if I'm wrong, but I was posting about RRR for like a month nonstop on social media.
Yes.
And I think I basically annoyed you into watching his movies.
I was like, come on, I need to see it now. This guy just keeps on posting about it every fucking day. And I just need to get a taste of Rajamouli.
Yes, I'm glad that you guys have been Rajamouli pilled, and we'll talk about it, I guess. So
Yeah, and because it is our first episode on Rajamouli, we will do a brief director summary. Thanmye, if you want to, you could take it away.
yeah, I am happy to. So S.S. Rajamouli, or Koduri Sri Saila Sri Rajamouli, was born on October 10th, 1973. Right now, he is an Indian filmmaker and screenwriter who predominantly works in the Telugu language industry. He was born to a Telugu family in the Raichur district of Karnataka. His dad, V. Vijayendra Prasad, is a screenwriter who currently primarily works with Rajamouli on building out his story concepts.
Oh.
There isn't a lot of information available about his early life, but we do know that he did move back to Andhra Pradesh and did his primary school education in a small town called Kovur. And then he got his engineering degree at a college in Elur, which is just kind of like a neighboring town.
That makes total sense that he got an engineering degree with all the design and creativity in these movies. We'll get there.
Right. Using some of those connections that he had in the film industry, he joined as an assistant to the veteran editor, Kotagiri Venkateshwar Rao, who, at the time was a very popular film editor. And in fact, Kotagiri actually became Rajamouli's editor for almost all of his films except RRR. Shortly afterwards, Rajamouli joined as an assistant director under a prominent director this time, K. Raghavendra Rao, and he eventually got to direct some episodes of a Telugu soap opera. Rajamouli has credited Raghavendra Rao as one of his filmmaking mentors. And then in turn, Raghavendra Rao has called Rajamouli in Telugu, Pani Rakshasudu, which roughly translates to like workhorse or a work monster, kind of, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
In 2001, he made his feature debut with a film called Student Number One, which was kind of a Telugu Masala film that launched N.T. Ramarao Jr., who is now a massive star in the Telugu film industry, who was recently featured in RRR as being Ben, if you want to know.
Of course.
And, Rajamouli has a really wide range of influences. He's often said that his favorite Hollywood film of all time is Mel Gibson's Braveheart.
Wow. Of course.
I know. And he says that he's heavily influenced by Mel Gibson's directorial work.
Uh-oh.
Nice.
Nice.
That's a problematic fave.
Right. We all have them, don't we? I know some of his other favorite films include Michael Mann's Last of the Mohicans, Wyler's Ben-Hur, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Terminator 2, the Indiana Jones series, and he's also a huge fan of early Buster Keaton comedies. In fact, his 2010 film Maryada Ramana was actually a remake of a 1923 Keaton comedy called Our Hospitality.
Fucking crazy movie, by the way.
Yeah, great. It's really good. If you guys haven't seen it, it's a great watch. Most importantly, he cites a lot of Hindu mythological texts, such as the Ramayana and Mahabharata, as major influences on his work. He also talks about the Amar Chitra Katha, which are basically comics that kind of depict these Hindu epics, primarily for kids. He cites them as major visual influences for the Baahubali franchise. Despite these latter influences, Rajamouli personally claims to be an atheist, which, yeah, take that how you will.
Yeah.
Cut to today, he's probably India's most successful working filmmaker. He's directed a total of 12 films. All films were successful both critically and commercially. Rajamouli is pretty known for being a perfectionist in the industry, especially notorious for incredibly long production schedules, expecting 100% commitment from his leads and his crew. Prabhas himself committed about 5 years of his life to Baahubali.
What?
Whoa.
I know, right? Yeah, no, he really expects his actors, especially his lead actors, to block out that chunk of time, and he's like, "You're with me. This is our time."
Wow.
Get jacked.
To get jacked, to eat interesting. The thing is too, apparently Rajamouli made Prabhas get on this really strict diet where I think Prabhas was eating something like 60 boiled eggs a day or something.
Oh my God.
To get jacked for the movie.
It sounds miserable.
It does sound miserable.
Hey, but if it makes you look like
It
that,
pays off. He looks
Yes.
great.
I'm gonna go buy some eggs.
Oh my, I know.
Yeah, get ready. Benjamin Yap, the next star of the next Rajamouli film.
Ben Hubali.
I'm expecting this changed by the Ponniyin Selvan episode. Let me tell you, Ben.
I need 5 years.
That's true. And also, Rajamouli is also incredibly notorious for delaying the release dates of his films because that's how committed he is to getting his movies perfect. Fun fact, he works with a lot of his own family on his projects. His cousin, M.M. Keeravani, has done the music for all his films. Like I mentioned earlier, Rajamouli writes his films with his dad. And M.M. Keeravani's wife, Srivalli, has worked with Rajamouli as a line producer since Iga. Rajamouli's wife, Rama, has worked as a costume designer on all his films. Rajamouli's son, Kartikeya, actually worked on Baahubali as a second unit director. And then he worked on RRR as a co-line producer with Srivalli.
Wow.
Another fun fact, Rajamouli famously attracted the ire of the internet early in the pandemic when he mentioned in an interview that he fell asleep while trying to watch Bong Joon-ho's Parasite. In an interview, Rajamouli said, quote, "Parasite didn't work much for me. I felt like the film was slow in the beginning. We started watching the film a bit late around 10 p.m. And so halfway through, I dozed off and fell asleep. And frankly, I think this is absolute Chad King behavior.
Yeah.
Because who would say that?
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, in comparison to Baahubali, most things are slow.
Yeah.
That is true.
Take that, bong head.
I know. I read that and I was like, wow, I have even more respect for Rajamouli. So yeah, I think that kind of closes out the background portion of it.
Yeah. Thank you, Thanmye.
Have we said what we watched?
We haven't, but I want want to ask you, Thanmye, how did you first discover Rajamouli's films? What was your first Rajamouli film, and how many have you watched?
So I remember, like when we were talking about Mani Ratnam, I told you that he was not a filmmaker that I was kind of connected to when I was a kid, and I kind of discovered him in college. Rajamouli is that director that I have been growing up with since I was a kid, right? Like, his films, they have been kind of mainstays in sort of the Telugu-speaking households, and I come from a Telugu-speaking household. The very first Rajamouli film I saw was Magadhira, and at the time I had just moved to Florida with my family, and I was like 11 years old or 10 years old, and at the time it was like still trying to make new friends and stuff. And I remember watching Magadhira in this like really like awful theater. Like it was just a really terrible theater, but there was something about that movie, and I credit Magadhira a lot for kind of starting my passion for filmmaking. I think it was kind of Magadhira, Avatar, and Inception that kind of like started everything.
Heck yeah.
Classic brown boy behavior.
Yeah.
Rajamouli is somebody that I just have a very personal connection to. I think sometimes to a fault, where I watch his films and I'm so taken by them, and I can't really, point out any flaws, because his films are such mainstays in Telugu households. Like Magadhira is like the movie that you play when, you have a house party at a Telugu household, and, that's the movie that you put on the television while everyone else is kind of doing their thing, Like, honestly, if you were to ask me, like, the two best blockbuster filmmakers working right now are S.S. Rajamouli and my other favorite Indian filmmaker, Christopher Nolan.
Yeah!
He's Indian? You guys have been wrong this entire time? He's not British. He's ours.
I am waiting for the day that we cover Nolan in this podcast, and I asked you to do a director background, and you're just like, he was born in Chennai in like 1940s.
Yeah, he went to Punjab National University. And then everyone's like, what is happening?
You gotta rewrite history, dude.
I know. And then, and like literally I remember seeing Iga in also a theater in Orlando. I saw Baahubali 1 in this like really rundown theater in Toronto when I was visiting my uncle.
Why do they always run down theaters?
What's up with that?
Circumstance, and also, I don't know, it's just where I was at the time, I guess, mentally and physically. And I remember watching that movie in this theater in Toronto, and the end occurring, and and my jaw like dropping, like with what happened at the end. And I actually, I remember somebody in the theater like standing up in shock, like this dude like just stood up when the end happened, and I was like, and I'm sure everyone's like sit down, but like in their head, but everyone also was really shocked. So it was like a big thing. And then I saw Baahubali 2 in that came out in 2017, right? So I actually, this is the most I've ever spent in a day, I think. I took an Uber to like Hartford, Connecticut to watch it on the IMAX screen there.
Oh.
And that was just incredible.
Oh, I'm sure.
And then I saw it a second time with my mom when I went back home.
Oh.
And RRR, I've seen 3 times in the theater.
Yeah, boy.
One viewing for each R.
Exactly. I had to honor each one, Yeah, so when we were talking about Mani Ratnam, Mani Ratnam is a director that I look at his films and I'm inspired in my own writing and storytelling and the way I want to make movies. S.S. Rajamouli is the director that I watch and I'm like, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to make something like that. But I love it so much. It's kind of the way that we watch like people like Cameron, people like Nolan, right? Where we're like, oh my God, I'm just so astounded by the spectacle and the construction of this that I will never be able to make this. But that itself is like enough to inspire us to be better filmmakers, to be better writers.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what Rajamouli has been for the longest time. So yeah, Rajamouli is kind of that OG director for me, where I kind of grew up watching his movies, and cut to today, I'm so incredibly proud of him because he ups his game like with every movie, and he's just an incredible craftsman at that too. So
Yeah. I'll go after you, Thanmye.
Sure, go for it.
It was all thanks to you that I started watching those Rajamouli movies last month. And I sort of went on a little binge after I saw Magadhira, and I was like Thanmye, it changed my life. I was like, oh, this is the guy that I've been searching for my whole fucking life. Like, who I believe in.
Yeah.
Cinema has the ability to be a form of maximalist entertainment. It should be, right? And that is why people go to the movies. This is what brings people to the cinemas. And while Hollywood is in the depths of the most bland superhero filmmaking we've gotten in years, like halfway across the world, and also because RRR is screening all over the world, but halfway across the world, Rajamouli is absolutely knocking it out of the park every feature he's done, or every feature I've seen from him. So after Magadira, I went on and watched Maryada, Ramana, and Iga, and then the 2 Bahubalis, and I am patiently waiting for RRR, which I assume stands for Reduce, Reuse, Recycle, to come out in Hong Kong, and I can learn about how to be a great environmentalist and take care of my planet.
Yes, you actually set the theme of the film. It's all about recycling and reusing. So you're right on the mark. You're right on the money there.
Yes,
He catches a motorcycle and promptly puts it into the waste bin.
Exactly. That part they cut out of the trailers, though.
Right.
You go to the movie for that. You know, to see that part.
Yes. But I am constantly in awe of the way that Rajamouli is able to construct scenes, but also entire film, like based on spectacle and based on maintaining your heart rate as high as it can be, having you as an audience member engaged the entire runtime of this movie. And I think the 2 Bahubali movies, the movies that we're going to talk about today, are, at least to me, the top tier examples of that. And I think, like Thanmye said, with every film, he keeps on one-upping himself, and also in a beautiful way, and in a beautiful as it should be way, keeps on getting more and more popular every new release he puts out. So that's why the Bahubalis are our popular pick for Rajamouli. So Ben and Eli, do you want to talk about your experience with Rajamouli?
My first brush with Rajamouli is when I think Thanmye mentioned RR in the Discord. Check out the Discord link in description. And I was like, okay, what is this? Let me look at the trailer. And I was like, okay, this looks a lot. I wanted to watch something a lot. I found out that there was no Telugu language version playing in the cinemas except for the IMAX screening. So I went for the IMAX screening of RRR. And that is the best introduction to Rajamouli you could possibly have. I'm starting at the peak here.
Yeah, I'm jealous of you, Ben. And you, Thanmye. I haven't seen a Rajamouli in a theater yet. I'm waiting for the day.
It was bonkers. And when we have all seen RRR, we can talk about it. But that was a great first impression of basically his latest work. So I was very excited to watch both Bahubalis. I basically just finished watching these in the past 2 days. They remind me of Chinese wuxia films in like a weird way. I'm reminded most of like Zhang Yimou's Shadow, which was also very extreme and like creative in its set pieces. But of course, with Rajamouli and with 6 hours of film, there's just a lot more that he's like chucking in here. It makes me think of like Shakespeare in the kind of plots that he's doing as well. It's very Shakespearean kind of like court intrigue type stuff. Of course, the scale, like RRR is, in a sense, if I can use this word flippantly, realistic. It is about a past that kind of looks familiar, whereas Bahubali is fantastical. It is, I don't want to call this period, but it's more of a fantasy setting, even though it's like supposed to be like ancient era India, whatever it is. I'm not a geographer, so I don't know what the periods are called. So, but with Bahubali, there's much more of that world building, which feels very big. I mean, I feel like with everything I'm going to say about Bahubali, it's about how big it is and just how much more stuff there is here. But I think the Shakespearean stuff where like it is able to keep things small despite the scale of the war.
Yes.
That's the stuff that keeps you engaged, especially in the second part. I'll go into a little bit about the first part because I feel like the first part, by nature of it being kind of an introduction, feels very weak to me.
Right.
As a introduction to the story. It feels a little like it needs to get you to a place so that the second part can be fully a climax.
Yeah.
And I find that a little awkward, the way that it's kind of cut down the middle. But the second part, I think, is much, much stronger and so engaging because of Rajamouli's taste for kind of his reverse Uno card in plot. He loves to like put that twist on you. RR has a great twist, and I love that about that. And then when I saw that in Bahubali as well, like he constantly changing up who you think is who, where you think allegiances lie, and like putting characters in different kind of spots in terms of like where their power lies, makes it very interesting to watch, even if you disregard the spectacle and the action and the fighting and the CGI and the animals and the fire and everything. So that's kind of just my ramble about Rajamouli for now. And I'm really excited to actually watch Iga because it feels like something smaller.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what that Rajamouli film looks like. So I'm pretty excited to see that and like what he comes up with.
It is literally smaller.
I'm also curious about how Rajamouli could possibly go smaller, because I agree with Ben that this is just about the largest movie I've seen. Lord of the Rings came to mind in terms of a comparison of scale, but I almost want to say that this is a step beyond, because there is nothing binding this movie. It is not coy. It does not use bathos to undercut itself. It is unabashed, and it is entirely successful to me. I find that there is a trap in comparing American cinema to Indian popular cinema, because that often winds up being condescending of this half-baked understanding of melodrama or hard on sleeve or convenience. But I come away from the Bahubali movies feeling like I've found the type of spectacle that I click with more than, yes, our current superhero fare on the American side. The big things that I'm most impressed with, aside from the incredible scale and choreography of the action, are, as Ben said, this immaculate palace drama and political thriller that emerges in the second picture, which is so remarkable because all the motivations of each character are so clear and traceable. For example, how the Queen Mother Sivagami Devi's want to balance her love for her sons leads her into being fooled by Balabiva, the evil son. As an example, these ways that motivations become flaws and intertwine so intricately, I'm deeply impressed by that structuring of the plot. I have to remember all three things now. When it comes to the action and the spectacle, the endless creativity, every beat is a new thing. And that ties into my third thing, which is that the characters are not just clever, they're not just quippy, again, in a way that undercuts the movie, but they are smart. If you think of the climactic battle at the end of the first movie, which takes place in the past with the senior Bahubali, he's given fewer weapons, he's given these wall-destroying trebuchets, unlike the finer weaponry that his brother is granted for this battle. And he uses that so intelligently to cast giant drapes over the enemy army and then set them on fire. Not only is that incredible to look at and stunning, it is smart. The characters are clever and smart. This is an important distinction for me. All three of these things and more make these wildly impressive movies to me. I, unlike Ben, do like that structure a lot with the delayed exposition of what happened in the past, because that pulls me into the second half of the first movie and the majority of the second movie very deeply.
Yeah.
I find that the places where I like the movie least are the treatment of Avantika's agency, which is ultimately contracted some by Devasena's agency, I think. And also, I sense a strong streak of colorism in this movie, particularly with the enemy army in the first movie.
Yeah.
Those are like the things that make the first movie much weaker.
I agree.
I don't know, maybe we should do other stuff first before we get into this.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you basically hit on the exact two things. Yeah.
But those are my main big points that I come away and why I feel so impressed and engrossed. I was telling Wilson and Ben that I watched the first movie especially sort of piecemeal as I had time this week, and I just instantly was pulled back in. I was watching, I'm ashamed to admit, on my phone on the subway at one point, and the noise surrounding just faded away. I was fully pulled into the movie. I admit this shamefully, but I also use it to say how strong this movie is.
Eli, did you watch the conclusion on your iPhone?
He's gonna fight you through the computer screen.
No,
This is like watching Dunkirk on my Apple Watch energy. Let me just tell you.
I'm sorry. I'm a busy person.
No, I get it. No worries.
Yeah, we did have 6 hours of watching to do for this episode.
I know. I'm giving you a hard time. Don't worry.
But the ending I did not watch on my phone.
Okay, great.
I watched it properly, and I was so shocked.
Yeah.
Wow.
Katapa is my favorite character. MVP.
Oh, he's great. Okay, before we really fully dive into this movie, I'm going to do a quick plot summary. So, Bahubali, the beginning, and Bahubali, the conclusion, tells the epic tale of Mahendra Bahubali, who is the lost son of the ousted king of the Mahishmati kingdom, Amarendra Bahubali, and his wife, Princess Devasena. So Mahendra's search for the truth about his past lead him to the heart of the kingdom and a thirst to fulfill his destiny. That's all I got. That's the briefest of plot summaries I got. Well, let's establish also some characters that we're going to cover or we're going to talk about in this episode. So we have Bahubali Jr. and Bahubali Sr., both played by Prabhas, gorgeous and also great acting, but mostly gorgeous. No, both.
Incredibly charismatic.
Yes. And we have Avantika that Eli mentioned earlier, who was a rebel fighter fighting to free Princess Devasena or Queen Devasena, and Mahendra falls for her in the beginning. We have Balaladeva, who is the brother of Amarendra, so it's the younger Bahubali's uncle, and he's the son of Sivagami and Bijaladeva. Sivagami is the queen mother of Mahishmati. She cares after both her son Balaladeva and also the older Bahubali after her mother dies during childbirth. And then we have featured more prominently in the conclusion, we have Queen Devasena, who was Bahubali's senior's wife that he courted and was taken away from him by Balaladeva. And last but not least, we have Katapa,
Yeah.
who is the king's guard and whose family swore an oath to protect the heirs or the kings of the Mahishmati kingdom. And I don't think I'm missing anybody. Am I missing anyone important? I think I've covered everybody.
Those are the big ones, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we should just dive in. What I think we should do is I really like thinking about Rajamouli's work in a macro and a micro scale, because on like a major plot structure basis, I think he's doing a lot of interesting things here with storytelling and with themes. But also when we get down to it, we can pick some specific scenes that we want to talk about, how he's able to so masterfully craft these individual set pieces. But yeah, I think we should first talk about the split between the beginning and the conclusion, because although I think all of us can agree that the beginning is the weaker of the two, it is intended to be a setup for what happens in the conclusion. And even Rajamouli himself said in an interview prior to the release of the conclusion, he says that in the first part, it was only the introduction of the characters. We haven't really gotten into the plot yet. So once all the characters are established, which is at the end of part one, then they can actually move forward with the plot. And he says part one is like the starter of the meal and part two is the actual meal. And I feel like that's definitely how I feel about it. And I think on a rewatch, I appreciate a bit more what the beginning is trying to do with getting us to very clearly understand our main players and what their intentions are and what their attitudes and emotions are, attaching them to really iconic imagery, and the imagery being repeated in the opening credits of the conclusion. So like Devasena with the twigs as she's putting it into the pyre that she is dreaming of burning Balaladeva in, or the cliffhanger of Katapa stabbing the older Bahubali. All these iconic images are established in this first part and the pathos is beginning to build up. And then when we get to the conclusion, it just all comes to a head with both the flashback timeline and also the regular story timeline. Looking at it in an overall perspective, I think is just such a genius work of storytelling in that you have both part 1 and part 2, but both movies are sort of split with a flashback section and a regular section. And the regular time section is sort of sandwiching the flashback. And through the flashback, we get to gain all this emotional weight to what Baahubali needs to fulfill, like his destiny. That is able to fully realize in its like most heightened form a Rajamouli theme that I think is the strongest for me. And that is destiny. You are set on this earth to finish a thing, finish an unfinished thing. Like think about like Magadira, which opens with two lovers falling to their death off of a cliff, like separated in the air and unable to come together. And the whole movie being their reincarnated selves finding each other again. It is an idea that Rajamouli continues to revisit. I'm not that familiar with the Mahabharata, but I would think that that is a major theme that Rajamouli took from that. Or I think it's just something that feels like it is very central to his filmography.
The stuff that you're talking about with fate and destiny, like I'm thinking about RRR now as well, and like that also has some of that thing that you need to do. RRR does something, no spoilers, that is, I think, really interesting with how it deals with fate and like what you are meant to do, what you really want to do from a plot level. Here, like when you have stories of fate and destiny, it really works very well in a melodramatic mode because there's a very strong sense of audience fulfillment.
Yes.
Right, especially with the 6-hour epic, right? Like if you're able to sell that fate and then get them there in the most difficult journey, then that arrival at the destination feels really powerful. Like, I mean, the ending of Bahubali 2 is so short. He sits on the throne. That's it. You know, there's no epilogue. There's none of that. It's just, we're done. We're on the throne. You don't need to think about, and that feels good. You know, that feels like conclusive and satisfying.
Yeah, because even though his films are so long, he just gets to the point, right? Like, there's no wasted time, really.
Yeah.
Like, even though you're like 2.5 hour long films, there's no wasted time. It's weird to say that, but it's true.
One of the ways that he so efficiently creates catharsis in line with this almost system of belief in his characters' destinies is through setup and payoff of plot elements. So we've talked about how Queen Devasena is creating the pyre that Balaladeva is eventually immolated upon. There's also the giant statue that Mahendra Bahubali helps to raise and then knocks over in the climactic battle, which allows his mother to step across the area where the burning bridge was. These are things that are planted early on, and seeing them pay off in such perfect, sometimes convenient, but satisfyingly convenient ways later on, like 5 hours later, is so satisfying.
That's part of the stuff that makes it feel very cohesive in a way that I think modern Hollywood films have kind of lost a little bit. I feel like scenes in modern Hollywood films have kind of an ulterior motive. Like they're like, okay, this is the comic relief scene rather than a scene within a larger picture. So I think his macro view of his story, even though it's such a long story, feels very dialed in. Although this is also a way for me to segue into why I feel like the introduction, the beginning, feels a bit weak to me, is because the first hour of the beginning feels extremely extraneous to me. And I struggle a lot with that, especially with Avantika's character and the way that she feels like a footnote in the conclusion. She feels like a little bit of sex appeal just to fill in the first hour. I struggle a lot with that because the first film feels so much like the second half sets up the second film, and then the first half sets up the second half in a very kind of loose way that doesn't feel useful to the kind of grand scheme of things.
Yeah, you know, like you guys, I definitely with time have grown to not really like part one as much. I still admire so much of it, but a lot of it has to do with the way they treat Avantika's character and a particular scene where Mahendra is undressing her, but it's supposed to be played as kind of this romantic thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah.
I guess I kind of understand what Rajamouli was going for, but it's just kind of an uncomfortable thing to watch because of how like kind of male gazy it is.
Yeah.
And also how kind of cheapens her character a little bit too, because
Yeah.
she's introduced in such a fantastic way, right? Like she's first presented to Mahendra as like this image of pure beauty that like inspires him to come up the waterfall, and then Rajamouli subverts that by showing her as this like powerful warrior. And then it kind of feels like he degrades her character for, like Ben was saying, sex appeal and
Yes.
for the romance.
Yeah.
And then her character kind of stops there. And that's definitely something that has ruined, or not ruined, but it's kind of sours part one a little bit.
In a way, I feel like I would have given it a pass if Avantika's character, her story, was more interwoven with the kind of larger conceit of the palace intrigue, but she's so disconnected from what's happening.
Yeah.
And I'm honestly still confused about what her clan is doing. I understand they're trying to save Devasena, but like, where were they? Where have they been this whole time? It's such a big question.
They were the kingdom. Remember Devasena's kingdom?
Yeah, are they not from Devasena's?
I understand, but like they still feel a bit shoehorned in a little bit.
Fair.
Even though I get it. And also when you have the introduction, it kind of has this call to adventure thing for Bahubali. And I think there's the thing that I think is the most disappointing about having it is that when you look at the grand scheme of it, and I know this is a bit of a cinema sins problem of the film kind of nitpick, but it feels like Bahubali got onto this adventure because he was a little horny and he saw a beautiful woman.
Well,
It feels that way, and I don't like that I can have that feeling when I look at it from a big picture.
Right.
Yeah, because I feel like there must be some other way that we can get Bahubali Jr. to get to this point where he finds out about his past, like a different way, you know? Something that doesn't require him to be compelled this way to go up the mountain. I know he had already wanted to go up the mountain, so
Yeah, he had that natural compulsion.
I feel like there must be something else he could have done to get us there when this feels so unnecessary.
I agree with you, Ben. Avantika's characterization and ultimate really sidelining across both movies is the major disappointing part of, I suppose, both movies, really. What the first hour of the first movie does for me is really introduce me to Prabhas as Bahubali and shows his righteousness and strength. And the concerning part that is supposed to be played as charming is the way he treats Avantika. I see its goal, and also it doesn't quite land for me.
I don't think I had that big of an issue with the Avantika stuff until the musical number where he undresses her happens.
Yeah.
Before all of that happens, I just had a lot of faith in the Rajamouli logic of things. Like, Bahubali, in order to stop his adopted mother from going up and down the river to the Shiva shrine thousands of times, he carries the shrine to the waterfall. By placing it there, his own wish to get up to the waterfall is answered in the form of this mask, right? Without the mask, he might not even have found himself in the right crowd. He might have found himself with people in the kingdom that could have killed him. Like, I feel like in my head, it is all working in this level of like fate. Like you're bound to get there. This is your destiny. This is the path that you have to follow. Just going off of that, I was sold a lot more. But I think, yeah, the treatment of Avantika from that musical number onwards to when she's just basically dropped as a major character was a little disappointing. But I feel like it is hard, right? Because you have Devasena, which emerges in the conclusion as such a powerful character, both in flashback and also in present day, that her need and her want to get revenge on Balaladeva consumes everything. It makes sense because the pain is so large that I think Rajamouli just uses that as like the main driving force. Once you realize what he had done to her and older Bahubali and also the baby. I also do think that the beginning gives us a little more time to breathe, and I think that is maybe why I prefer part two a lot more. like right now in my rankings, Bahubali Part 1 is at the bottom of my Rajamouli ranking, and Bahubali Part 2 is at the top of my Rajamouli rankings. Yeah, I do also find the action set pieces in Part 1 to be a little lacking, right? I think there are a couple of them, like the avalanche scene.
I agree as well.
Where I think that the CGI unfortunately doesn't work for me as much as it does in a lot of the other scenes.
It feels like the CG in the first part is not as good as the ones in the second part.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that's just me. Like, it feels less polished.
Yeah.
It's almost like they put so much more money in the other one.
Yeah.
I kind of love the bullfight though.
The bullfight's great. Introducing Balala Deva.
No, actually, everything with animals looks amazing. Like in RRR, there's a lot of animal stuff.
Oh.
The animal stuff always looks good.
I love how they have a little like thing on the side that says CGI. Well, I was watching on Netflix and it says CGI, just so you're sure we didn't harm these animals when we made this movie.
Right.
There were a few
Making
moments
sure.
where they didn't have it. I was like, spy force? How did they do it without CGI?
To be clear, I don't think the bull looked realistic, but what the CGI lacks in seamlessness across both movies to me, it more than makes up for in creativity
Yes.
and inventiveness.
Yes. I want to cite a review from Sean Gilman, who's one of my favorite film writers and is on Letterboxd. He wrote a review of Bahubali Part 2, where he talked about the CGI use and talked about how Rajamouli uses CGI not only to just reflect reality or try to make things as real as possible, but he uses the words expand what we believe as reality, like using CGI to expand those bounds. I think that is something that I latched onto really early on watching like Magadira even, or Iga, is that CGI doesn't have to be realistic. If you use it in a way that people use animation to make things that you can't achieve in live action, you can get creative with it. And I think that's such a incredible breakthrough here, or like a very unique new way of using CGI that really utilizes to the maximum effect what you can do with CGI.
Right. Another thing too is, a lot of the stuff with the CGI is also the budget constraints, but one of the places that he's so good with is his use of CGI is so creative. It's also really incredibly well considered. It's almost like he knows what is the limit that he can make it seamless. Even though he knows that he can't make it fully seamless, he's still able to use it in a way that, like you said, Wilson, kind of expands the possibilities of reality. Like, I'm thinking about the Hamsanava song in Bahubali 2, which it is about a ship that takes flight, and it's kind of this fully CG rendered landscape. It's one of my favorite sequences in both the films. And Rajamouli understands that obviously a ship can't fly, but he uses CGI, he uses spectacle to externalize like emotion and pathos. That's how he uses it, right? Like the Hamsanava sequence is so much about externalizing the love that these two characters have for each other. They literally fly, right? With horses made out of clouds and, and you know what I mean? It's, again, like, it's all about not representing reality at its exact preciseness and exactness. It's about, I would say, painting reality and extending reality ultimately to externalize emotion and to heighten spectacle.
Yeah.
That is the way he uses it. That, I think in American filmmaking and blockbuster filmmaking, we've gotten to a point where CGI is so seamless that it feels part of the rest of the world. That to me, when I watch something like Bahubali, I'm like this is what the purpose of CGI in a lot of, at least in Rajamouli's films, it just feels so much more evocative and so much more of like a filmmaker behind that than a lot of the American blockbuster films that we get, especially the Marvel stuff.
Yeah.
It is entirely coherent across the board, and it is artistically risky to not give us CGI that is perfectly photoreal. And that also makes it a form of trusting the audience. Budget constraint aside, it says to the audience, I know that you will look at any type of CGI, no matter how well integrated, and be able to recognize that what you're looking at is not real. Even with that, you can look at these images and essentially learn the language that this movie is speaking with in CGI and get on board and follow the emotions and have a great experience. safe CGI, photorealistic CGI, is a form of succumbing or coddling the audience and meeting them where they are instead of asking the audience to step up and appreciate the experience the filmmaker is trying to impart with the tools that they have available.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a part of that, making that leap for the audience too, Eli, is Rajamouli's emotional structural basis for the way he especially made the Bahubali stories is so strong, especially the second half, that he's kind of like, okay, like maybe the CGI is not perfect, but you guys are on board, right? You know,
exactly.
Like he knows that the audience is on board, so he knows that the audience can meet it.
Yes.
It don't, like, bad CGI only becomes an issue, for me at least, when your core emotions, when your core structure is not strong.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
That's when you start to point out flaws, like, oh, like that bull doesn't look right, this doesn't look right. But when everything is motivated so clearly by emotions and drama and pathos, all of that like nitpicking kind of fades away. That cinema sin stuff sort of fades away, you know?
Yes.
Like, it's kind of like when you see old CGI, then it's less about how good it looks and more about what is the story you're trying to tell.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
He's working within his budget constraints, but he knows he needs this shot that has this thing. He needs these bowls to be on fire. So, okay, yes, of course, we're going to put CGI in this. I think he works within those constraints. And I think stuff like the fact that you need the CGI to be with the actors at the same time, which usually is very difficult. And I think those are where the seams come out the most. But I think it's important to see the characters in those scenes where you can see their faces and the acting while they're doing action stuff. The fact that he's not afraid to kind of put those two together, even though the scenes might be seen, but the fact that, like you said, Thanmye, that you can follow the emotional stuff, that even though you might spot that seam as you're watching it, you're gonna forgive it and you're following more of what is the element here, what is the story here, more so than whether it looks good enough, whether it looks seamless enough.
And what is the emotion as well?
Performance is more important than special effects.
It's making me think a little bit of a lateral move here, but it's making me think about what people would call, I guess, over-the-top action stuff that's in Rajamouli's films. I was thinking a bit about this and how the action is unrealistic. We have superhuman characters that are necessarily superhuman. You have this in Bahubali, but you also have it in RRR. But it's because of that same thing where the emotion is so strong that you're not really thinking about the realism of what's going on. You're thinking more about what is the effect of this. This is just a very big action to support very big emotion.
Yeah.
That's kind of his MO, right? Like, he is using this very strong emotional core so that he can push the rest of the cinematic stuff into very far extremes.
Right.
So that he can really wow you with that spectacle and not have the spectacle feel out of place.
Right.
Yeah. And something else to point out too is, I think we kind of talked about it a little bit with Mani Ratnam, kind of the definition of Indian masala filmmaking. He definitely fits into this mold. And I think what Rajamouli understands about masala and this type of storytelling is what you said, Ben, is that the viewer, you know, is going to like excuse these things with CGI, but the biggest like issue would be if you didn't get your emotions right. And I think that's one of the big things that he understands about masala storytelling is that, like, regardless of where the story goes and like what it does, that if your characters are right and your motivations are right, that the audience is going to be willing to go with you on the journey. You know, I think when we talked about Mani Ratnam, we talked a little bit about how Mani Ratnam subverts a lot of elements of masala storytelling, how he kind of breaks the masala film to try to get to something deeper. And I think Rajamouli's doing something a little different, right? He's perfecting the masala storytelling.
Yeah.
He's not subverting it like Mani Ratnam does. Those have different functions, I think, you know, when we watch a movie, right? With Money, you know, especially with something like Dil Se or even Bombay, right? You think about what you come out of it, even though, like, you know, both filmmakers, they have such great understandings of emotion. When you watch a Rajamouli film, the experience is different because the scale is much bigger, but there's such a fine-tuning of the masala storytelling here. There's such an economy of storytelling also, where you know that you're not watching something fresh and new, but you're watching something that's been fine-tuned in a way that allows you to have the most maximum reaction to something, right? Like Rajamouli's kind of perfecting that mold where I think Mani Ratnam always tries to subvert it with whatever he's trying to do, you know? So I guess that's a kind of an interesting thing that I realized, where Rajamouli, I don't think he's like doing anything with his stories that are totally different, at least from a basic way. Like,
No, yeah.
if you look at Bahubali, it's kind of like an inverted Lion King, like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know,
Which is an inverted Hamlet.
So it's Hamlet. It's just Hamlet. Okay.
Yes, that's true. He's not doing anything to subvert it. He just perfects it, right? He perfects it. Yeah, that's basically it. That's kind of what I've realized when kind of talking about with money and then talking about Rajamouli. They work in the Indian popular cinema mode, but they kind of have very different approaches to it, which is interesting because I'm interested to see what Mani Ratnam does with Ponniyin Selvan, because
that seems very Masala film. I don't know, down the line.
Right. Yeah, it's an adaptation of this like really popular novel, and it's kind of this big scale, almost Bahubali type epic. So it's interesting to see how Mani Ratnam's kind of desires to subvert the Masala mold generally, and kind of go with kind of his instinct, how that will fit into like this massive budget. Also, Ponniyin Selvan's going to be the most expensive Indian film of all time too, so we'll see what he does with that money too.
That like trumps Bahubali, because Bahubali once held the crown for the most expensive Indian series or film series of all time.
Right, it's going to top RRR. Like RRR was the most expensive. It's going to be more than RRR. So, yeah.
But I was reading about the budget for the Bahubalis, and both of them cost $56 million to make. That's the joint budget of the series.
It's very low.
That is low.
Didn't I read something last week that each episode of the new season of Stranger Things cost $40 million?
But most of that goes to actors.
Yeah, but still, I'm like, they're working at much lower like budget levels.
And here's the thing, Wilson, and I was talking to Eli about this a little bit. Eli and I watched The Northman really recently, the Robert Eggers film, which also kind of works in a mythic mode structure, right? But the weird thing is that is a $90 million movie, and you don't see a single cent of that on screen. I'm sorry to say for all the Robert Eggers fans, but it's so fascinating because I just came out of that movie, right? And then that was my last theatrical movie. And then I watched something like Bahubali, which, like you said, both parts were made with a joint budget of about $50 to $60 million, right? This could entirely just be a different approach, to filmmaking. But it's just something that I noticed is like Rajamouli is able to create this massive scale, like you see every cent and then some. Yeah. Whereas like in this like Robert Eggers Viking epic, it's like, oh, okay, you made like a $1 million movie. Great job. I don't know where the other 89 million went.
Into the volcano.
Oh my God.
So, I mean, sorry to all the fans, but I had to say it.
Eli, I read your review of it like a couple days ago, and I was thinking about your review when I was watching this movie, because you were talking about the overdubbing, which happens a lot in like South Asian cinema, right? And I'm sure it happened a lot for this movie. I don't know how much percent of the Telugu version that I watched was recorded on set or not, but they do have the Hindi versions and all the versions that they dub. And because it's so common for them to overdub these movies, the vocal performances are so impactful. Each line delivered packs the punch. They really make that moment count. And the importance of how things sound, Rajamouli really takes that into account. It is important for him to make sure that it sounds correct.
Well, just like with what we were saying about CGI, overdubbing is another tool. There's a reason why we don't complain about the overdubbing in like Bicycle Thieves or other Italian neo-realist cinema, even though it was all over the place in Italian cinema for decades. When there's a problem with the technique, it's a problem with the story, usually. The overdubbing in The Northman is cheapening the story. It is deliberately designed to make that story more, intelligible or accessible to a wider audience, whatever any of those terms mean, instead of using it as a tool of immersion or consistency and coherence for the story.
Right.
It's not a problem here because it goes hand in hand with what the story is trying to do, create those big impactful moments and focus on performance, as you're saying, Wilson.
I think something that we do need to talk about is the ending to Bahubali 1, particularly in its storytelling and also the way that marketed the second movie.
Oh,
So
yeah.
smart.
Right? Like, that is something that I definitely want to touch on because, from a storytelling structure, it is shocking. It's stunning. It's brilliant. I remember when I watched it in the theater, my jaw dropped. I was like, oh my God, what did he do? How could he do this? That's his best friend. Like with all these thoughts, The brilliant thing about that ending, too, is, it's a cliffhanger, right? And when I was there at the time, I had to wait another 2 years for Bahubali 2 to come out to find out why Katappa killed Bahubali. You guys watched it straight, so you had no problem. I suffered for 2 years.
Yeah, just click play.
But here's the interesting thing, that ending was such a shock to Indian audiences, was such a new thing to Indian audiences that Rajamouli understood its marketing capability.
Whoa.
So he started a hashtag after the movie came out, hashtag WKKB, why Katappa killed Bahubali.
Yes!
On Twitter.
Oh,
WKKB.
that's so good.
What that did was drive people that wouldn't have seen the first movie to see the first movie, and on top of that, got this insane audience to watch the second film. So this definitely had an impact, because let's talk about the collection for the first movie. The first movie made about 600 crores, which is about $77 million. The second movie made 1,180 crores, which is about $278 million.
Oh my goodness.
And I credit a lot of this to the brilliant way that they used the ending of Bahubali 1 to market Bahubali 2. Let me tell you about this number. This is still the highest grossing film in India. And interestingly, Bahubali 2 is also the highest grossing Indian film in the United States. It made 20 million in the United States. And even with RRR, Rajamouli was not able to top this. It's getting kind of close. It's still collecting money, but he still hasn't topped himself with RRR. I wanted to definitely touch on the ending of that film because it is such a great way to kind of gauge your interest into the second movie. And I remember, when that happened, I was like, oh my God, what are the possibilities? What could happen? It made me think about what happened in the flashback. But then, you kind of know Rajamouli as a storyteller. You're like, oh, it's going to be pretty kind of classical, straightforward, But he still gets you there. 2 hours into the second movie, that's when you find out why, right?
Yeah.
Why Katappa killed Bahubali. It's pretty rewarding because he's so good with intertwining all these character motivations, especially with Siva. The reason Katappa killed Bahubali is because of this deceit, right?
Yeah.
And this kind of palace intrigue, and Sivagami getting to a place where she felt like she had to have Katappa kill Bahubali, right? And it's so rewarding to get there, because he engages you all the way there that, when you do find out, it doesn't feel like, oh, that's why. That it actually feels like it's earned, that it's like, oh, this makes a lot of sense and it's really dramatically fulfilling to get to this point, to know why this happened.
The gauntlet that gets thrown down anytime you do a prequel, or in this case, an earlier timeline within the story of Bahubali, is, okay, where things end up. Is it still going to be surprising and emotionally engaging? Rajamouli passes that test with flying colors because he sticks so closely to character motivation and clarity of character emotion.
Yeah, 100%.
I think if the second part had begun with the answer, it would have been such a cop-out. It would not have that kind of dramatic engagement that you were talking about, Thanmye, where because it takes 2 hours for you to get the final answer, it feels like not a simple cliffhanger.
Yeah.
That 2-hour journey is all that palatial intrigue that we're talking about that is extremely engaging.
Yeah.
Where the kind of machinations of all the characters, and especially for Sivagami, who I think is a very interesting central character, because she's not like Bala, who feels very evil, feels like he just is in it for himself to be on the throne, right? He's a very classically bad guy. But then with Siva, she is not really gray, but she is
fallible,
swept along by the things. Yeah, exactly. Makes her a very compelling character. She's not really a hero, not really a villain. She wants what's best, but is swept up by her own emotions, by her own principles, by her own adherences to Mahishmati's kind of culture. And I think that makes her a very interesting character. So I think the women in part 2 are really, really fascinating, especially Devasena, who is a great character, especially when she's at odds with Sivagami.
Yeah.
All that stuff is so interesting because it has a bit of that. If only we could have talked this through, it would have been fine. But it has that great kind of cascading problems where problems beget more problems, and then that pushes us to this kind of final confrontation. That journey is very well plotted and really interesting. If this had no action and it was just all this stuff, it would still work.
Yeah.
And be interesting.
It's still so engaging.
Yeah.
taking that time in part 2 to build even more pathos and emotion and anticipation for him to really fulfill what he has to do. Like everything becoming so clear before you hit that like final action battle sequence is so important. That's why part 2 is just like the perfect, it's like the perfect movie, right? Because I feel like if you even didn't have the backstories there in part 1, you have enough emotion there cultivating in part 2 alone. All the things that happen in that final sequence makes it worth it. And I love Devasena so much. I think her introduction in part 2, when the bandits are coming to get her, and that fight sequence,
it is better than the way they introduce Amarendra. Like, honestly,
yes.
It is so amazing, right? Like, way he constructs it, like, cool. Like, a big, like, gate fell down, and awesome, he did that. But she, oh my, like, I remember watching this in the theater, and I was like, what am I watching right now? I was so like, oh my god, like, they introduced her so powerfully. I was, like, stunned. And honestly, like, what makes Devasena such a great character, too, is that she's so principled, too, right?
Yes.
You know, there's that incredible scene where Bala gives her, sends all this gold to the Kuntala kingdom, and she's like, well, I'm not impressed. Tell Sivagami to take this gold back. And she just, like, sends this, like, really crazy insult.
Yeah.
Like,
I gasped when I saw that the first time. I was like, oh my gosh, she said that.
Diss track.
It makes her such an incredible and strong character, the way they introduce her, the way that her and Sivagami Devi, like, butt heads because of their ideologies, right? Like, Sivagami is somebody who wants to stick to tradition, right? Like, she wants to stick to the laws, and Devasena's like, well, your laws are shit. Your laws are awful.
Yeah.
You know? And there's something so inherently amazing, and also I think something great for the audience when a character rebels against something, rebels against the status quo, right?
Yes.
There's something so satisfying about that. You know, in that incredible scene where she's pregnant and chained up, and because she cuts off the fingers of this guy who was, like, groping all the women.
Yeah.
Even there, she's just like, you have no morals. Like, you put a pregnant woman in chains, you know? And, like, she just does not hold back. And I think that's something that's so charming about her character.
Yeah.
And then that scene is just an amazing, and then Bahubali comes.
The ending is what?
Yeah.
When he decaps that guy, I was like, what?
Incredible.
Critical hit.
But at the same time, you can also fully understand where Sivagami is coming from, right? Trying to keep together this royal family that's basically just hanging on by a thread when she steps onto the throne at the start of that flashback. You can understand why it's so important for her to uphold these traditions and these rules and her dharma, and that mother-son relationship and the break of that between Bahu and Sivagami is so heartbreaking for me. I think I really feel that pain, and like when she says that line towards the end of that part 2 where she says, "Oh, Bahubali's death is certain," like when she's being pushed by Bijaladeva. I had to pause it. The first time I watched it, I was like, oh no, please don't. This is gonna happen.
Here's the thing, like, Rajamouli, he knows how well he built this mother-son relationship.
Yeah.
That when you get to the Kattappa killing Bahubali, one of the things that you see is a flash to when she names Bahubali. So Bahubali means the man with strong arms, and you flash back to the scene in the beginning of the movie where the baby Bahubali's holding, you know, and it just creates this, like, emotional, heightened, like, potency, and kind of like you're just like, oh my god, like, this is where we're at with this.
And he says to Kattappa, take care of my mother.
Yeah. And then Kattappa brings that up when he's like, he didn't even think about his wife, he didn't think about his unborn child, the last thing he said was about you. And it's like, oh, I definitely started crying. I was like, oh my god. You know, it's just, there's such a clarity of emotion, and Rajamouli knows when to turn that on and be like, hey, yeah, remember when the baby scene, you remember that scene? Yeah, I'm gonna put a little flash of it right here so it makes you so you start to feel bad about where this journey has gone. There's such a clarity with where he wants to take these characters in terms of what their principles are, also what their arcs are, because it's so easy for Shivagami to become a very bland character.
Right.
But she has such an interesting arc, even from the beginning, from the first film, where, in the first film, you're like, she's this very strong woman that protects her kids. And then you see that she's fallible, that, Bala was able to manipulate her. And then that's her tragic downfall, too. It's very classic, like, character writing, like this fatal flaw.
Yes.
And it's so easy to not have that for these supporting characters. But Rajamouli goes that extra mile to design out these characters to a T.
I think that's why I feel like the Avantika stuff, it feels like a miss there, right? Because he is constructing such complex and really emotionally charged characters all around, and all like female characters, and I guess he just didn't have room for Avantika, or didn't really have plans for her aside from that, where she was used in part 1.
That scene where Katappa is telling Sivagami Devi about Bahubali's final words, and it flashes back to the baby Bahubali holding on to Sivagami Devi's finger, makes me realize that a great strength of Rajamouli is, as I'm thinking about setup, payoff, callback, motif, a great motif in this movie that I think speaks to how microscopic Rajamouli is able to go to extract emotion in addition to these gigantic set pieces, is he uses touch so well. From the foot on top of Katappa's head to hand-holding to the gesture of promise that repeats across the movie when one palm is laid atop another. These are all extremely heightened and emotionally hefty moments. Yeah, Rajamouli's so good at getting even the smallest detail to speak volumes.
Right. I think one of the most important ones is when Devasena asks baby Bahubali, you're gonna save me, you're gonna sit on the throne, and it's like a baby, but he still does the shot of the touch and the promise. It's destiny now. Like, the baby has to do it, And yeah, exactly. I echo everything you're saying about how he is able to focus on these very specific audiovisual motifs that build. And it's just, again, like, it goes back to this economy of Masala storytelling that he's so good at.
Yeah.
And that I think that he even more fine-tunes in RRR, which, I'm not going to really speak more about, but he's just so good at it. Yeah.
Because I think once you reach that level of perfection, you're able to start playing around with it and like get creative with it as well. And I think that's where Rajamouli finds himself right now, because he has mastered filmmaking. Like, that's check filmmaking done. Let me just do something more here.
Also, once you have the foundation of the tiny, you can build within a movie to the gigantic.
Right.
So maybe let's talk about some set pieces.
Yeah. My favorite set piece is a scene that I actually saw before I watched this movie. And there was a clip on Twitter of it floating around, and I was like, what the fuck is this? And it is the scene in part 2 where they are trying to sneak into the castle and the gate's up. So Bahubali like senses that the palm trees are like flowing in the wind, and he comes up with this plan to catapult like groups of people on palm trees, like and they're catapulted over the walls of the castle into it, and they just bounce off of their shields and are straight into action. And I think that's one of the most genius things that they could have thought of, and looks so cool.
Yeah.
Even though very obviously entirely CGI. But still, I'm like, damn, that is exciting. That is so well thought out. That's just like a fun thing to show you, to watch.
Some writers want to show off how smart they are, but Rajamouli and his father here turn that show of intelligence into problem solving for the characters. This is what I was saying earlier about the difference between a character being clever and quippy and smart and adept at problem solving. Both Bahubali Senior and Junior have this skill.
You were talking before about how the fact that he has an engineering degree makes sense. Stuff like this makes me think about that, and also about how even with his like CGI heavy scenes, he is very cognizant of action and reaction. Like,
yes,
if you think about that launching of human cannonballs,
Yeah.
essentially, there's a lot of stuff here obviously that's unrealistic, but what's important is that when they land, they explode out into like a flower.
Yeah.
Right? And of course, they have like thighs of steel to even be able to land and not die. But even though that doesn't make sense, but the fact that you have that reaction of people flying out of the cannonball, that reaction helps you sell that shot. With all like his heavy hitting stuff, it's always so high impact, but they don't feel floaty. And I think that's very important because I think a lot of Marvel stuff can feel very floaty,
Right.
you know, with a lack of impact.
Yes.
But here, the impact in like all kinds of stuff, it feels physically possible in its kind of realm of possibility.
You feel the impact.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important when you're doing something so bombastic, like with Bahubali.
Right. And also like a lot of these wide CGI shots, they kind of function in a way to clarify where all the action is happening. You know, I think that's also an important thing because there are places where I do think Bahubali a little bit falters on the clarity of how the set piece is going. I keep saying I'm not going to talk about RRR, but this is kind of like in RRR, the clarity is immaculate. I don't know if you would agree with me, Ben, but in that movie, it's
I
like
definitely do.
the clarity of, even though it's these big CGI practical things, but here it's like you start to see that he's already concerned about that, right? How he wants his viewer to be guided through the set piece. Personally, one of my favorite set pieces is, I don't know why I love this set piece so much. It's kind of like a smaller piece of kind of when the the bandits are trying to raid the kingdom, Devasena's kingdom, is when Devasena's coming down the hallway and Bahubali like introduces himself with the arrows and then he teaches her how to shoot the arrows. I love that scene so much. It's really like romantic. It's fucking badass. It's like it kind of builds on like kind of this like feeling that Devasena has had that, you know, remember we get like a scene in the beginning where she is trying to shoot 2 arrows but she can't, and then that is kind of like brought back when Bahubali's like, not 2, you got to use 4 fingers and you got to turn your wrist the other way, and then she masters it. It's such an amazing scene, and it also functions on like they're falling in love, you know, like it's like a really romantic, but it's also just like super kick-ass.
Yeah.
Also, incredible shot in that scene of when Amarendra first fires the 3 arrows and they go whizzing past Devasena's head and jingle her earrings.
Yeah.
How did they do that? Because the arrows are CGI, but how did they get her earrings to like move?
I'm sure that's
Probably
CGI
someone
too.
holding her ear.
Maybe.
CGI out the fingers.
A guy in a green suit just wiggling her ear.
You gotta look at the credits for the earring wiggler. That's your answer.
But that shot also, she's being wooed and you see her emotion. It's not just flash.
Yeah.
There's content, and every beat is imbued with character, not just pure action spectacle.
Yeah. That whole like section of the comedy, like romantic comedy stuff with Devasena and Bahubali Sr. and also Kumar Varma, who's I love Kumar Varma. He's so funny at this.
Himbo.
Usually like that section, right? Like if you have this part smack dab in the middle of this saga, you would think that, oh, like that's like the little snooze section, right? That's the lighthearted part that we should not pay that much attention to. But I think like Rajamouli's amount of care and precision just in those scenes makes it worth it. The boar chasing scene with both of them and Bahu trying to control the arrows from behind Kumar Varma is so funny, and the way that he's trying to like dumb himself down, and Katapa playing up this role of like, oh my nephew is so great.
The blockhead.
Yeah. The blockhead.
That sequence has my favorite comedic moment in the movie, and I full on paused the movie, went back and transcribed this because it was killing me. There's a point when Katapa is trying to convince Kumar Varma of his strength because Bahubali was really the one to chop this block of wood in half.
Yes.
Katapa says, "Monitor lizard's tight grip, bull's blow, a warrior with an eagle eye, elephant's might, tiger's body, panther's speed, lion's magnificence. I can see the entire jungle in you, my lord." Just as it went on and he was laying it on thicker and thicker, I was crying. It's so funny.
Yeah. And then when Rajamouli takes Kumar Varma's character and twists it, and making Kumar Varma basically the reason that Sivagami orders Katapa to kill Bahubali Sr. Near the end, is so heartbreaking. Thamma, you were talking about that arc, right? Like even a character as small as Kumar Varma, his arc is so potent emotionally for you as a viewer.
He gets to become a hero as well.
Yeah. Before that as well.
At first, he feels like comic relief, and then he becomes a hero because of Bahubali, which also builds the kind of principle and the charisma and power of Bahubali. And then becomes friends with him and then becomes his downfall. It's unexpected to have Kumar Varma in that role later on, but when it happens, you're like, oh my god. Like, he has like a role in the macro level of the story.
Yeah. Ben, you were going to say something about speaking of payoff.
Oh yeah, speaking of payoff. No, because we're talking about the human cannibal yeeting over the fort gates stuff.
Yeeting.
The palm tree thing was already kind of set up when we had that whole sequence where Bahubali and Devasena go off into a village and like start making their own town kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then they do this thing with the water.
Yes.
So that felt like a very random thing, but it wasn't that random. It was actually important for the final battle for that.
Think like your father, right? Yeah.
Every single thing pays off.
I was scrubbing back through the movies, and I think my favorite set piece is at the start of the second movie, in which Sivagami Devi has to complete a ritual. She's walked for 100 miles, what was it? Barefoot to light a statue of Shiva on fire. It's important as part of the ritual to crown Bahubali as the next king. And an elephant goes wild, and it starts to stampede towards Sivagami Devi. It's such a great setup to this action sequence because there are instant high stakes of what could go wrong, and it's writing the character into a corner of how could this possibly be solved. And then boom, Bahubali emerges with this giant cart that is the perfect device to stop this elephant and for his mother to pass through underneath the wheels. It's so well placed at the start of the second movie to bring us back into the flow of these movies, and it's creative and a blast and shows Bahubali's bond with his mom.
Great.
I agree.
I'm thinking now about there's a fight with the bandits, I think, but with Katapa and Bahubali together, and they're throwing that sword around or the hatchet.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about how that also is another example of something that is paid off with how Katapa kills Bahubali.
Yeah.
He mirrors the exact shot too.
Exactly.
Like, it's the exact thing where it's like the weapon is kind of at the top of the frame, flipping, and it goes down, and Katapa catches it. Whereas in the beginning of the movie, that scene is played for laughs because it's supposed to be like a little bit, like Bahubali's so entranced by Devasena that he's not realizing that his Katapa's gonna die. But then at the end, it's like then you see that again, you're like, oh my god, like it's like he's bringing this back, like So
you're like, please.
That's a scene about their friendship.
Yeah,
and then he calls back to it in the scene in which they betray the friendship, which is just crazy because like I don't think I can think of a movie that does something so elegant with something like that.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have to make that connection, and I would still know they were friends before, but having that direct link between those two scenes has an impact. It's a very visceral thing, but it makes you remember like a muscle memory thing that like you feel that connection through the throw of the weapon and how that gets broken. This is random, but I just started remembering about it. And tell me if you guys agree with me. The strongest weapon in these films is always like a tree trunk. Because there are so many scenes where it seems like nothing hurts Bahubali, whether young or old, like a sword, arrows, nothing seems to do anything. But when he's hit with a tree trunk or like a branch, he seems to fall over the most. But that's just my kind of weird theory, because just when you watch them all back to back, me and my girlfriend are watching, we're like, wow, every time he gets hit by a branch, he falls down. But swords, like he doesn't feel anything, invincible against swords, spears, arrows. But hit him with a stick and he falls over.
Yeah, that's why you gotta reduce, reuse, recycle, RRR.
Yes.
Yes.
The trees will get you.
Yeah.
A lot of tree-based weapons.
I know that we've spent the episode shitting on part one, but I do want to bring up the scene in part one where Bahubali sneaks into the kingdom for the first time, and as he's sneaking in, they're putting up the big golden statue of Bala, and the statue starts falling because people were not looking, and Bahubali saves the day, and one of the people sees his sees his face and recognizes him, and that just starts this massive chant that starts happening. They're chanting for Bahubali's name while they're carrying up Balaladeva's statue. And I think that like one of the best uses of CGI like happens right after that moment, because they're all chanting Bahubali's name and you see the statue like fall into place, and then it starts zooming out, and behind this golden statue of Balaladeva is this even larger golden statue of Bahubali. And it is just like the perfect way to like smack in your face. Bahubali is not forgotten. Even though Balaladeva likes to believe that him and Devasena are the only people who remember him, that is not true. And I think that was one of the most powerful moments in that first film.
For sure.
That is a great sequence.
I think that's the intermission of part 1. And it's so interesting how that also mirrors the intermission of part 2 when Bala is about to be coronated. It also functions in a very similar way, right? Where it's Bala trying to be this demonstration of his power, his newfound, of him being king, but the people's king is Bahubali, right? And it's always about undermining Bala's power and his feeling of power, right? And like how that intermission in the first part works, and then how the intermission of the second part works, where there's not much of a response when he's being coronated, but then when Bahubali does his speech, everyone goes crazy, right? And how Bala feels about that, right? And it's the same way that he felt about in part 1 in the interval, where everyone was saying Bahubali's name when his statue was being put up. It's a brilliant pairing, right? It makes you kind of call back the intermission of the first part too.
Right, I didn't notice that before.
Actually, I really like that scene in part 2 where the chanting like and the stamping and everything like makes the entire world shake.
Oh, yeah.
That stuff is just kind of cool. Yeah, I like that.
So good.
The way he builds the energy in that scene is brilliant too, where he's like telling each of the sections of the military, and then how he cuts to all the shots, and it's like so much of like, you get like a sense of the scale, and then everything all comes together when Bahubali is being coordinated. It's just the scene construction is so precise, right?
Yes.
I think the energy of that scene is brilliant.
How the soundtrack shifts because the space is so vast that each part of the chants are different because they're so far away from each other, and they have different musicians that whenever he cuts to a different area, it's a different song about Bahubali. I don't know. It's
Right.
It's great. And I think there's so much in the sound design and the score of this that is a lot of like the tone setting and also like the anticipation of action and the buildup of that is just through this percussive or like this rhythmic like beating of the drums. Yeah, it just really works so well in maintaining action. Even though action might not be happening on screen, you're still feeling it through the propulsiveness of the score.
Yeah, Keeravani's score is brilliant in both of these movies. I mean,
Oh yeah, that's his cousin, right?
that's his cousin, yeah. Yeah, Keeravani's score, I think, works much better in the second movie. I found it in the first movie that I didn't find there to really be a sync with the music and the action. But I feel like in part 2, they really nailed that sync where Keeravani knows exactly when to play up a scene, when to hold back. And I think that balance was something that they found so perfectly in part 2. Whereas in part 1, I don't think they fully got there. Like, there's some good pieces of music, but I think the music in part 2, like, is far better than part 1. At least the use of it.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Whoa. We've been talking for nearly 2 hours.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like we've been talking that long, which also makes me think about how when I watch these films, it feels like the amount of time that passes is longer than the amount of time that actually passed. Not in a bad way, like it feels long, but like I feel like I have just swallowed so much information that doesn't seem to fit in the amount of time that's passed.
It feels epic.
Yeah.
I was watching part 2 and I was like, how the fuck do you wrap this up in 40 minutes? Like at the end? I was like, I do not know how. There's so much left to do. There's a fight scene. There's all this other crap. And I was like, how? How are you going to do it? And he does it and he's able to like jam a lot of action and information all in actually in a way a short amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
A director I keep on thinking about when we're talking about these 2 films is John Woo. John Woo has a similar sense of like imbuing action scenes with a lot of emotion. And I think both of them have their own really like distinct stylistic ways of presenting action, but they both perfect it in their own ways. And I'm thinking about the two Red Cliff movies that John Woo did. That's why because they're both like historical 2-part like epics that have these massive action set pieces. I don't think any other director is able to, except for these two, that are able to really intertwine the emotional and the really high action stuff into one, where your investment emotionally in these characters are tied with your investment in them achieving what they wanted to do in this action set piece.
I'm glad you made that comparison to John Woo, because a comparison that I see a lot of people make to Rajamouli is Zack Snyder.
Oh.
And I think that's such a wrong way of looking at Rajamouli's filmmaking. And it's kind of a pet peeve that I've had with a lot of letterboxed white cinephile spaces engage with Rajamouli's filmmaking. They engage with it on purely a spectacle level, on purely a visual, like on a kind of, oh, what I'm seeing is so crazy and bonkers.
Yeah.
It is such a disservice to his capabilities as a storyteller.
Yeah.
What his skill as a filmmaker. I saw a lot of this when RRR was coming out. This like, oh my God, the action's over the top. It's this like condescension that they kind of hide underneath praise.
Yep.
You can tell like, oh my God, like they are looking at it at such a base level. And then when I see people compare his films to like 300 or Snyder, I'm like, you don't get it. You absolutely don't get it. And you're not giving this the time of day.
Yeah.
And frankly, we don't need those kinds of opinions. You know, we want people who will critically engage with his work. You know, and if you have a problem with the film too, like you have to critically engage with it. Like I'd rather opinions that maybe don't like Rajamouli's films and critically engage with it than the opinions that praise it, but like totally get everything wrong and like condescend to it in a way that is, I find, really disrespectful, and also just like not the way that you should be watching Indian films in the first place.
Yeah.
You know, it's a larger issue with the way that people watch Indian spectacle too. They don't understand like the functions of how Masala works. And then when they see something like Baahubali 2 or RRR, there's just this weird attitude I start seeing from a lot of white cinephile spaces that, like, I actually wrote something about this on Letterboxd when RRR came out. That's also one of my most liked reviews on Letterboxd, which is crazy.
Yeah, self-plug.
Yes.
We can put a link in the description.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm so really, really happy that you guys are talking about his storytelling abilities, because that is something that I find people don't talk about at all, especially in white cinephile spaces who think they've like discovered Rajamouli and think that and then say like, oh, this action is so crazy, and don't look at what we talk about, the palace intrigue, all these like motifs that he's working with, right? It's just a disservice to the filmmaker that he is, you know, and his capabilities.
It really is.
Absolutely.
Rajamouli said in an interview that I watched today, he said, I don't think I'm a good director. I think I'm a good storyteller. And the directing part of it is the thing that he's always unsure about, but he is very sure of his stories and the impact that they have.
Well, he is also a good director.
Yes, he is definitely a good director.
And I'm so glad that we are talking about Baahubali this way, especially in this way, because the most popular podcast about Baahubali is
It's Deep Cut.
Yeah.
is now, I hope, is now going to be Deep Cut. There's this podcast episode by these three like white film YouTubers, and they basically spend an hour poo-pooing the first part, just like saying things that kind of come off low-key, like pretty racist, and like really just, you know, they do that like snide YouTube thing of like doing the CinemaSin stuff, and then they're just like, oh, I don't get Indian movies, and I'm hoping that this podcast that we have is a corrective to all of that. Kind of, I just wanted to say that because I'm glad we're actually critically engaging with this film and not just, I don't know, watching it because we think it's like a funny Indian movie.
Yeah. It is far from that. It is much more.
Yes.
Viewing anything that you don't like in a movie as something that's wrong with the vernacular the movie is working in is such a terrible way to watch movies.
Yeah.
To not approach a work of art humbly, open, and ready to receive and step up to where it is.
Yeah. And we are a filmmaker-based podcast, and what is the point of our podcast if we don't respect the filmmaker and what they want us, in the way that they want us to watch their movies?
We chose the wording of our introduction very deliberately.
and we almost changed it.
Yeah. And we are not done yet. So you can join us next episode when we take a deeper dive into Rajamouli's filmography with Iga.
Fly
It's
episode.
going to be a fucking wild ride, guys.
I don't know what to expect with this.
You two have no idea what's happening. You two have no clue what's coming your way.
You don't know what's coming. Let me tell you.
I look at the synopsis, I'm like, okay, where do we go from here?
Because Bahubali really operates as like, okay, this is gonna be, I guess, a spectacle for everybody. Iga is still a spectacle for everybody, but before you watch the movie, you're like, how could this be for me?
Yeah.
And you'll find out. You'll find out.
Like, I can at least put Bahubali into a box, right? Like, I understand the kind of movie this could be. I do not know what box Iga is trying to be in. It could be buzzing in any box.
Ooh. Buzzing in any box.
Nice.
Okay. First, I want to say thank you to our special guest today, Thanmye Lagudu, for coming on the pod again
Thank you, Thanmye.
Thank you.
and helping us introduce you all to the works of S.S. Rajamouli. And you will also be back next episode. It's not going to be too long before we hear from you again.
Yeah.
And you got to come back for Ratnam this year as well.
Yeah.
Thanmye.
For Ponniyin Selvan. That's coming out in September. Yeah. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Podcasting.
Big year.
Big year.
Oh, podcasting this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. And I'm so glad you guys committed 6 hours of your life to this series. I feel like there's certain filmmakers that we're all very annoying about, and that particular filmmaker for me is Rajamouli. And I've always been trying to get people to watch his movies. You know, it's so great to like have a really in-depth discussion that actually like considers the film and like actually looks at what he's doing on a form and structural level and on a narrative level. This is really awesome, and I'm so glad that you guys really enjoyed the conclusion, because to me the conclusion is basically one of the pinnacles of like mythic storytelling. Like it's brilliant. I think I've seen it like 4 times now. Like it's and I'm glad that you guys got out of it what I got out of it when I saw it on like the big IMAX screen. Yeah, thanks for having me on, and I'm glad we had this really awesome discussion.
If you've seen the Bahubalis 4 times, that is a day of your life. Incredible.
This is spread out over years, though. Like, so I guess it's a day out of whatever 4 or 5 years. So
I saw some Letterboxd review. He was like, I've seen this 1,000 times. I was like, damn, bro. I don't think that's real, but if I was imagining it, that's a lot of Bahubali.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this movie too is like it's really difficult to recommend to people in a way because it is such a long commitment. Like we can't ignore that it is such a long commitment. It is like very much like I think it's worth it.
Yes.
But it is always difficult to recommend it to people because it's like I don't want to just recommend the first movie because
you can't.
Because you can't, right? And I don't want to just recommend the second movie because you kind of need some of the first movie
because you can't.
Exactly. Yeah, because you can't.
Yeah.
I think my go-to recommendation for Rajamouli now is like is some of his like like Iga and some of his earlier stuff that's like one movie, and now it's going to be RRR for anyone I ask how they want to enter Rajamouli. I'm probably going to tell them RRR and then start watching his other stuff. So
I wonder if this would be Rajamouli's claim to fame for my life, where all the films on the podcast I actually watched with my girlfriend, who is not like a big cinephile, because I watched RRR with her and she was so down with it, which is how I got her to watch
The Bahubalis.
both Bahubalis back-to-back days.
Oh my
We watched
God.
it last night, the first part, and I was like, you need to come back tomorrow. We need to watch the second part before this podcast is being recorded. I was like, you have to, because how else are you going to know what happens?
Yeah.
How else are you going to know WKKB?
Exactly. And Ben, I mean, how did your girlfriend respond to RRR? Because I'm very interested, because like it's a film that demands quite a bit from its viewer, I think.
I mean, part of it is like she kind of comes from this, like appreciating it for the spectacle, but also kind of like the intense emotional storytelling. But she's also there for like Ram just being a man, like being such a man. I think just really enjoyed the spectacle of it. Yeah, but I would have to ask her like how else she like really enjoyed it. But she was down for Bahubali for sure, based off RRR, which I think is such a great introduction to Rajamouli's work. I feel.
Yeah, it's a quick 3 hours.
Yeah.
Very quick 3 hours.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Deep Cut. Please rate and review because that helps us keep making the show. Be sure to subscribe to us where you listen to podcasts so you'll know when our next episode drops. Keep up with Deep Cut on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd at Deep Cut Pod. Join us to talk about movies on our Discord server, to which you'll find a link in the description. Thank you to Justina Yam for our beautiful artwork. I'm Wilson.
I'm Ben.
I'm Eli.
And I'm Thanmye. Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about more movies with you next time.
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah. Nice.
I'm just gonna do my thing where I play the movie in the background as we.
Okay. Which one, though?